I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Welcome to today's episode. Today we have Rachel Pierman. She is the owner of CraftyMonkies. So if you've ever heard of CraftyMonkies, they do great work with quilters all over the globe. So check them out. But also, she is the amazing host of Breaking the Blocks podcast, where she talks to other creatives, other quilters about how they break through maybe blocks that they've come up against in their lives. I am going to be on her podcast talking about the ups and downs of being a step parent, but also the amazing adventure that it is to be a step parent. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rachel. I love her so much, and I hope you do too. And let's get into it. All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Thank you for having me here. I am very well. And as I just said to you, it's so strange to be on the other side. I mean, it's going to be hard for me to not try and lead this interview because that's what I do. But I promise I'll be on my best behavior. I'll just sit and listen and answer.
Yeah, it's okay. Honestly, we're less interview, more just chit chat over here. So if you
Yes.
have questions for me or, it's fine. It's all good. So I'm
Yeah.
just so excited to have you because little teaser, I'm going to be on Breaking the Blocks with you sometime soon in the future, which obviously we'll announce dates when we have them solidified. But this is so fun to kind of flip-flop and swap roles with each other and get a taste of each other's world this way. So I
Yeah.
appreciate
And
you.
you and I were saying earlier, I think it is about supporting each other, isn't it? It's about
Yeah.
supporting people in whatever they are doing. And
Yeah.
I think I think you followed me and I followed you back and we had a little conversation. And then it was like, why don't we go on each other's podcasts? What fun.
Yeah.
And they're quite different podcasts. So it's not going to be like this, the same chat is going to be repeated twice because they're quite different. So yeah, it's lovely.
Right.
It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, well, great. Well, for anybody who doesn't know, you are the founder of CraftyMonkies.
I am. We
And
should spell it. We should spell it. Because right now people are going to type crafty monkeys into Google and
yeah.
they're going to find a Welsh pottery shop. And that's not me.
No, so it's crafty like you normally spell, and then
Yeah.
monkeys, Monkies.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So
Because I
be careful.
misspelt it. Because I
Yeah.
misspelt it. That's why.
Really? It wasn't
That's how the
purposeful?
name, yeah, that's how the name came about.
You
Yeah.
know what? I love that though. Just ride
Yeah.
with it because then it does set you apart because you're not the other crafty monkeys. You have your own name and it still says monkeys, right?
Yeah. And the band, Hey, hey, we're the Monkeys.
Yeah,
Weren't they spelled Kees?
they
I think
were.
so. So I think there
Yeah.
are different ways to spell monkeys. And
Yeah.
it was quite funny because one lady just suddenly said to me in a class one day, it's so cool how you spell the name Crafty Monkeys. And I just went, what, you mean the name is cool? She went, no, the way you spell it. And I was like, what do you mean? And she, well, monkeys is spelled Keys. And that was like 6 months into my business. And I went, oh,
You're like
I did not know that.
all this
And
time
that's
and
what
nobody checked me.
no, and that's why when I registered Crafty Monkeys on Instagram and Facebook and Company's House and everywhere, it was available, and I was astonished. Why was Crafty Monkeys available? Yeah, 6 months later, I found out why because I had spelt it wrong. So yeah,
That's iconic. I love that. I think it's so funny. But also, yeah, it stands out and it makes you unique because you look at it and you go, yeah, that's monkeys. And I'm like, that's not, is that, I don't know. I was like, whatever, it's probably intentional. Like, who am I to guess?
I've given away my secret.
You
No, it's
know,
fine.
I like it. I want to know all the secrets. But so so let's talk about Crafty Monk because you're not a quilter yourself. So
I
where
know.
did where did Crafty Monkeys come from? I mean, what?
This, yeah, this is where your audience have just turned off now because they've gone,
No,
she's not a quilter. I'm not
no.
interested.
They're gonna
No,
stick
I'm
around because
joking.
they love me and I love you. So they're gonna stay. It's fine.
Well, basically, I mean, I do really respect the world of quilting, and I like looking at quilts.
Mhm.
I went to the Festival of Quilts recently, and
Mm.
I loved looking at the quilts. I would really like to go to QuiltCon one year because I think that would be amazing to see, because I think it's much bigger than Festival in Birmingham, although Festival is big.
Mhm.
But yeah, the reason it came about is because I'm going to try and keep this quite short, but
You don't have to.
I would like to give some hope to your lovely listeners if they are facing something now that is very difficult,
Mhm.
because we all do in life. And the difficulty that I faced that led to Crafty Monkeys was being fired.
Mhm.
Yes, it wasn't. Well, was it being fired or made redundant? I'm not entirely sure, but I was marched into an office with no warning and I lost my job.
Wow.
And that job was me presenting on TV on a shopping channel, but it was a craft channel. So it was called
Oh.
Create Craft. And I had no idea this was coming. I was taken out of the studio. I'd just done a huge show. We
Mhm.
sold tens of thousands of pounds worth of product.
Wow.
And I was taken out of that room, led down a corridor, and then put into a room where two people were sat. And within 3 minutes of me sitting down, literally this man said, "Thank you so much for coming, Rachel. Here's the contract signed to say that we no longer require you in the building." And I'd been there for, I don't know how many years it was. I'd like to say I'd been presenting on that channel for at least 4, maybe
Wow.
5. And I was absolutely in shock. I mean, I just sat there and was like, what do you, what, I'm sorry? I
Yeah.
have dates booked for next month. Yeah, well, you don't, because we don't require you. And then I said, have I done something? No, you haven't done anything. It turned out, I've got to be careful what I say because I don't want to be sued. Um, there was a restructuring. There was
Mm.
a new managing director. I did call him the next morning because he'd sent out an email a few months ago going, "I'm so friendly, you can approach me about anything." So I rang him and said, "Let's approach you then. Why
Mm.
have you got rid of me?"
Yeah.
And he did say, he said, "Okay, I'll be completely honest with you. You are a freelancer. You're on a 0 hours contract, which means we can end your contract. And shortly, all the freelancers will be gone. We're just keeping the staff members. The staff members will be made to work longer hours. And that is the restructuring of the business."
Whoa.
So at least I was kind of glad that it wasn't anything personal. It wasn't that they didn't like me as a presenter or anything like that. So, but it was gone and the income was gone. And I was the person who earned just about all the money in our family.
Mm.
So it was like, oh, okay. So I have no job, I have no income. And obviously, it being television, it's not like I can go to another television company round the corner and apply for a job. I mean, they're
Right.
few and far between.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, and this is another thing, that I firmly believe in, which, as you know, with breaking the blocks, I firmly believe that actually we're all guided in our lives. And I think the universe looks out for us. And
Mhm.
sometimes it has to pull the rug on us because we're not making a decision. I did feel like I was really coming to the end of my tether in that job. I was standing there selling things. Although they were creative things and there was some creativity on the show, it was always about money. It was
Mm.
always about selling product. And my little soul was dying. And
Yeah.
I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And I actually wanted to start a company, which I did register, called Go Blossom. And it was going to be for ladies in their 40s and 50s and upwards who had lost themselves and wanted to re-find themselves.
Mhm.
That was my aim. I wanted to talk about diet and nutrition, not dieting to get thin, more about healthy diets and supplements and how we can look our best, feel our best, be at our healthiest.
Mhm.
But also, I wanted to do some kind of, you know, mental things as well, so we could talk about how we can find ourselves, empty nest syndrome, etc. And I wasn't doing anything about it because the
Mm.
money was so good that I was earning. And
Yeah.
it was like, well, I have to keep earning this money because I have to keep supporting this family. I can't leave. And
Yeah.
I think the universe went, "You're never going to
Mm.
leave. We're going to
Yeah.
pull the plug."
Mhm.
And it did. And so I was forced into something. So literally within about 2 weeks of that job ending, I had to earn some money somewhere. And I said to my friend who was a quilter, who still is a quilter and is my best friend, she'd been working on the show with me on the channel. And I just said, I've lost my job. She was horrified. And then she said, look, don't panic, don't panic. Let's put on an event. You are always going to have creativity as part of your Go Blossom. Let's
Mhm.
do an event where we teach people to sew with these machines that we've been selling. We
Yeah.
could just do a little church hall or something like that.
Right.
And I drove away and I thought, no, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something luxurious where people have amazing food
Mhm.
and amazing views, and they come and they make friends as well as learn to sew. Why sit in a drafty church hall? Nothing against drafty church halls, but I just thought, why not do something that makes us feel brilliant about ourselves? And so we did. And so I started the company, Crafty Monkies. And the way the name came about, we've heard about the misspelling, but it was my husband who said, I had to look for a name. And he said, well, let's think of something crafty. And he said, what would you say to your audience? And I'm a northerner in England,
Mhm.
and northerners often say, you cheeky monkey to people.
Yeah.
And I said, I probably would say you cheeky monkey. And he said, well, how about crafty monkeys? That was it.
Oh, I love
That was
it.
it. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I just launched it, literally registered the company, had nothing apart from a little MacBook
Mhm.
and the idea. That was
Yeah.
it. And just put on this event. And my husband is a graphic designer, so he built the website. He'd never built a website. He was always a print designer, so he
Mhm.
never. So we were sat there both looking at buttons, going, "Try and move that box around, move this around." And we launched this very basic website. We look back now and we laugh. I mean, we only had stock photos of ladies. They were American ladies doing yoga. I don't know
Oh,
why we used them on a quilting website, but I just thought they looked kind of happy.
yeah, right.
So we just did this website and we launched one event, which was the first event. And within 20 minutes, someone bought a ticket for £150.
Ah.
And I was like, first of all, wow. And then secondly, oh my, I've got to actually do this event now. What am I doing?
Yeah.
And it's grown from there.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's
that's how it
awesome.
began. So it began from something
Mhm.
very, very difficult, which is what I wanted to say to people listening out there. If something is awful happening right now, believe that there is something good at the end of it. There's a
Mhm.
lesson, there's a
Mhm.
change, there's an opportunity. You just got to seek it and hang on in there, really.
Mhm. I think it's a mindset thing too, because it's easy to see or experience something like that and just feel like, well, that's it. Like, I'm getting all these no's, I just got fired, whatever. But if you're not willing to see opportunities, then you won't find them. But I think if you're open and whatever your belief system is, but I'm with you. It's like, I think the universe is in our favor if we lean into that, and it'll show us what we need to see if we're willing to see it. And so that's
Yeah.
really amazing, and good on your friend for seeing you and knowing you enough to know that that's something that you could pull off, because I think sometimes it does take a good friend who knows the depths of you as a person to be able to say, quit crying, get your shit together, and you're going to go do this next thing, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, actually, yeah, I am.
Yeah. And do you know something? That same friend just did that today because I was, in not a good place this morning. You
Hmm.
and I've just talked before we did this podcast
Yeah.
about, because it goes on. Okay, I started the business. Well, my life hasn't been all roses since then at all. I mean,
Right.
it's quite the opposite. Running a business is very, very, very difficult.
Hmm.
And today, because I've got a few things happening, including the upcoming empty nest syndrome, my daughter is leaving home on Friday to go to university. Um, this morning I had I had a big cry actually. It wasn't a little cry, it was a big cry.
Yeah.
And that same friend was there and she pointed out quite a few things. And at the end, I thought, yeah, she's right. Get you said the word, I'm going to say it, shit together, Rachel.
Mm.
Get your shit together. But that's what
Yeah.
we have to do. We have to
Mhm.
keep getting our shit together because basically we will have shit piled upon us. We
Right.
have to clean it off,
Yeah.
clean it
Yeah.
off
Exactly.
and
Wipe your
get back
face.
on track. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's okay. It's like you can feel the big feelings and you can have the roller coaster that is life and keep moving forward. And that's what I always tell my husband. Like, my response, my reaction to big feelings is to cry and always has been. And
Yes.
I've
Well,
just only recently in the last few years just really allowed myself, like, if I'm start to cry, I just let myself cry because my body clearly needs to release that energy, and I don't shame myself for it anymore. I don't apologize for it anymore. If I can remember not to, because sometimes I'm still like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I'm actually not sorry. I'm not. And I'll take it back. But you can like cry and do the hard thing, you can cry and keep walking forward. So I think that's as a business owner, a fellow business owner, it's you have to cry
well,
and long arm the quilts at the same time
yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. You send them back damp.
Yeah.
Um, you literally put tears into your quilts.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know the phrase. I always forget this word. I always forget it.
Mm.
But there is actually a physiological thing that happens with crying. Is it called the sympathetic system or sympathetic system or
Yeah,
sympathic?
the
It's that para
parasympathetic.
thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
basically it's you have if you cry, it's actually a really good thing physiologically. It's good for your
Mhm.
body. And
Yeah.
it is true, isn't it? When you have a good old sob,
Mhm.
you feel better at the end of it, and yet nothing has changed.
Yeah.
You're still in the same situations, but you've just let it all out. And I'm a firm believer. I saw a great post the other day, actually, which I talked about on the Instagram feed about emotions, um, in our lives.
Mhm.
And what this person was saying was you shouldn't let emotions drive the car, because if we imagine it as a car, if you
Mhm.
let them drive the car, you're going to be out of control. But you
Right.
shouldn't put them in the boot either, because if you put them in the boot and bury them,
Yeah.
well, they're just going to die, which is not a good thing, and you'll just feel suppressed. You
Mhm.
shouldn't suppress your emotions. But I do understand we've all had trauma in our lives, and
Mhm.
some people it's very difficult to express their emotions and they need guidance and help with that. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but
No.
I'm saying if you are able to express your emotions or have a big old sob,
Mhm.
then do it.
Yeah.
Then do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have a healthy outlet, it makes it easier to not let your emotions drive the car, or it's it's if you give yourself space to feel the feelings and understand where they're coming from, then you can, when you move forward, you can do it with more information. I think that's what emotions are informing us, that something's going on. If I feel a certain way, I'm like, oh, this like this thing that's going on that triggers this feeling for me. And that's because of that. Like, but you have to know yourself. You have to get to know yourself, and you have to get to know what your triggers are and the things that will make you feel a certain way, because it's not the same for everybody. And so you might not be able to figure it out by watching someone else. You have to get to know just yourself. And I think
Yeah.
it can be really hard to do when you've been in a people pleasing place, or you feel like you have to act or be a certain way in order to, move up the corporate ladder or get somewhere in life. And it's just not true. We can be ourselves and be successful. And I think it's just scary. It feels scary.
Yeah. And I think
So,
when you're facing new twists and turns in your life or new challenges, and any change is scary, but
mhm,
I do think you have to face those fears. If you keep running away from those fears, they're going to catch you.
yeah,
They're going to catch you. And you can't keep running for your life. Can't keep
no,
running all the time. So,
no,
yeah.
it's
So there you
exhausting.
go.
Yeah. Are you fed up with your sheets just not feeling as luxurious as you want while also being durable? Well, look no further. I'm partnering with Cozy Earth, and they make the sheets of your dreams. I have been sleeping on my bamboo sheet set all summer, and I have to tell you, I am never going back. The bamboo sheets are made with 100% premium viscose from bamboo, and they are so breathable, you'll sleep a few degrees cooler. And who doesn't want less sweaty nights? The fabric also has an enhanced weave that won't pill wash after wash, and they're guaranteed for 10 years. All that, and they are so soft and sleek, you'll feel like you're at a high-end luxury hotel. And now you can elevate your own space by going to cozyearth.com and using code GRANNIES for an exclusive discount for up to 40% off your purchase. And if you receive a post-purchase survey, be sure to say that you heard about Cozy Earth from this podcast, and they'll send you a free pair of socks. So if you're ready to upgrade your nights and transform your days, head to cozyearth.com and don't forget to use code GRANNYS, that's GRANNYS, for up to 40% off your purchase. Some life advice. So that first event you had, how many attendees did you end up having?
Oh, okay. So once again, let's be completely honest about this situation. We had, I think it was 8. I think I was hoping for 20,
Mm,
and we got 8.
okay.
Um, and it was a 2-day event. So 8 people booked on the first day, and then the second day, I think something like 4 booked on.
Mm.
So I said to my mom, who used to sew in a sewing factory, so she could sew in a machine. So I rang her and went, "Could you bring some friends to this event?" And she said, "Well, I've got 3 friends, but I don't think they sew." I said, "It doesn't matter.
I
I'll
just need
give them a
bodies.
machine.
Yeah.
Just put them on a table." So she did. It was so funny. And then bless her little cotton socks. I remember in front of the other ladies, because I said, "Just keep it secret." And I said, "I'll call you Cynthia, all right? I won't call you mum."
Mhm.
And she was like, all right, that's fine." And then in the event, she walked up to me and then just said, "Oh, Rachel, Rachel, take that money." And then she gave me this money. And this lady was watching, and I went, "No, and then she
Yeah.
just went, "I've got to pay you. I've got to pay you." And of course, everybody else has paid. And I'm going, "No, it's fine." And she's got, "I've got to pay you. We're all paying you for this event." And fair play, they did all pay for their tickets because they had
Mhm.
such an amazing time at the end. Her friends actually said, "I haven't sewed for years. I loved this."
Oh.
So they did pay, but I then just turned around and I said to the group, "Listen, ladies, thank you so much for coming. I am going to tell you something.
Mhm.
This is my mother." I said, "This is the first event, and I just didn't want to have 4 people here. So this is her and her friends." And everybody was so like, "Oh, Rachel, it wouldn't have mattered."
Mhm.
But it was fine. And of those ladies that came to that event, they've all continued to do things with me. But there is, I think it's one lady from that event now called Ruth,
Mhm.
who has continued to come on the retreats.
Oh my gosh.
And she's still there to this day. And she was the
Mm.
first person to buy a ticket. And she'd actually watched me on Create and Craft.
Oh,
And
okay.
although it was never publicized what had happened,
Mhm.
people knew something had gone horribly wrong because I was just extricated. I mean, I was never
Right.
in that building again. So after saying on that show, "See you guys tomorrow,"
Mhm.
Rachel disappeared, and it was like, "What's?" And the audiences are not stupid, so they
Right.
knew. And she, when I asked her, when I met her, and I said, "Why did you buy a ticket within 20 minutes?" And she said, "Because I wanted to support you, because I knew what had
Mm.
happened. I knew something had gone wrong, and I wanted to support you." And she's done it the whole way through. She's an
Oh,
amazing lady,
oh,
amazing
how
lady.
lovely.
Yeah,
That's it is funny, like, people notice and you think, "Oh, nobody's gonna know," or what if, I don't you just have all these questions, but it's like, no, people know.
yeah,
People know what's up, and especially if you've been successful and you've been showing up all this time and then you just disappear,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, that's amazing that she noticed, and it's amazing that she keeps showing up to support you because that
yeah,
is like those ride or die supporters are everything. It's like,
yes,
oh, there's that person, like you see their name pop up, they like your stuff or they comment on your posts or your videos and it's like, oh, there you are. Thank you so much. Like,
yeah, exactly. And I have got a very loyal audience. I've got, quite a few now of those supporters who always do that. They mean the world to me, and they've kept me going in dark times. And it is really important to have those people who support you like that. So yeah,
mm,
there's a few now. There's quite a few now of regular loyal supporters. Some Americans who've flown over for the retreats, and I met them in America this year, and I've met them on previous classes.
mhm,
And then lots of Brits and few Europeans and Canadians thrown in, and some Australians who I never ever get to talk to, sadly, because they, of course, with the time zones, it doesn't work. They can't
right.
do the online classes because it's like 3 a.m. for them, and
Mhm.
whatever it is for me. But they do rent the classes, and then they email and say, "Oh, thanks so much for providing something for us Aussies. We never get anything because the timings are so bad, but
Yeah.
we do love what you do." So there is an audience there in Australia as well. That's the wonderful thing. It's global.
Yeah.
It's global now.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I think the globalization of being able to rent classes or to be part of online groups when they're at will videos, and you can go back and play it. The time zone doesn't matter anymore. And it would be nice to participate live sometimes, and if you can, that's great. But just being able to open things up to the world, I think it's shaping and molding the quilting industry as a whole, because now more and more people can see each other's work, whereas maybe, those poor Aussies wouldn't have seen your classes before, and now they can, or they wouldn't
Mm.
have seen someone else's content, but now they can because of, YouTube or Instagram Reels or any, things like that. It's really been wild to watch it transform. I mean, just since I've been quilting since 2017, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, because this was like my seventh year of since I've started quilting, but just in those last 7 years, watching things evolve and getting more inundated, but also loving it, like being surrounded by it. And when when we get isolated too, it's like I think the lockdown was a huge push for that too. People were like, well, I'm bored, so I'm going to start sewing, and I have the time now. And so I think that was a really huge push. So things like Crafty Monkies are important because it does allow people to get connected when they're otherwise isolated or in different time zones. So I love that. And
Yeah, and that's something I should say, talking about rugs being pulled, because I didn't say when I started Crafty
oh, yeah.
Monkeys, which was August 19. So my first event was December 19. My first retreat was February 20. And I had 5 more retreats planned for 20. That was
Yeah.
my business.
Yeah.
And in March, the whole world shut down.
Oh my
So
God.
that was the end of the business as far as I was concerned. I was like, okay, well, that was short.
Yeah.
And once again, it was the same friend, Sarah.
Mhm.
I rang her and said, don't believe this. And then she said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. And I said, look, Sarah, because at that point, she was the only sort of quilter that I knew.
Mhm.
Sarah Payne, she's called Payne. But make sure you Google Sarah Payne quilter, because there
Okay.
is another Sarah Payne. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's not a quilter.
Okay.
But yeah, Sarah Payne quilter. And lovely lady, very talented traditional quilter, very different from the majority of people I work with now who are all modern quilters, but she's traditional.
Mhm.
And yeah, I said to her, oh, Sarah, why don't I just do an interview with you and put that on the grid on Instagram? I don't know what I'm going to do. And then she went, okay, well, we can do an interview. Because I had a lot of, on Facebook, I had a huge following from Create and Craft. They'd come over to Crafty Monkeys,
Mhm.
and they also were very big fans of Sarah's. So I said, look, we'll try and put something on Facebook or something. So I just Googled, how can I do an online recorded interview? Literally.
Yeah.
And this thing came up called Zoom.
Mhm.
And I was like, what is Zoom? And I opened up the screen like you and I are. And then I just sent her an email and she popped up. And it was so funny because I was like, oh, there you are. Okay, hi. And then I said, how do I record this thing? Is there a record button? We didn't know what we're doing. But it was her that said, can I? She's very technical minded. And she said, hang on, can I, do you, can you send me the email again? Which of course you don't have to, but I did. And
Mhm.
she opened it then on her phone, not her
Oh.
computer. So when she opened the phone, of course, it was like wiggling everywhere. And we're laughing about the views that we had on the phone of her chin.
Mhm.
And then she turned the phone round onto her hand.
Oh,
And
yeah.
suddenly her hand was big. And then she said, so if I was sewing right now, you could watch me. And I said, yes. And she went, so you could sell tickets to this Zoom where people could watch and sew.
Mhm.
So within a week,
Mhm.
we got a class listed on the website. Once again, I did not know what I was doing, but we just listed it. It sold out within 2 hours. 45 ladies from
Wow.
Facebook just went, okay, we'll do this. And then I opened it on this Saturday, and the window opened and all these little windows opened, 40 ladies. and I didn't really know which buttons I was pressing, but we, we'd practiced,
Mhm.
and it was like doing a live TV show for the first time. We were both terrified, but we did it, and we were able to spotlight her hands. So she was big screen, and everybody sewed along. And at the end, everybody said, "This has been the best thing." And of course, it being COVID, everybody was trapped inside.
Right.
So that's where it started again with Sarah. And from there, we just, we did about 5 or 6 of her classes. I think she did like a cathedral window,
Ooh.
all sorts of things.
Mhm.
And people absolutely loved it. And then obviously in the last 4 years, it's unrecognizable
Mm.
from that early
Yeah.
first class, but the principle was there. And like you say, I think when it became global and people across the world started joining, although COVID was stopped and lifted and the world opened, a lot of people said to me, "Oh, please keep going with the online classes because this is amazing. We can now
Yeah.
work with Nicholas Ball, Carolina Anetto, we can work with all of these amazing quilters that we could never have done before,
Mhm.
and this is fantastic." Well, for me, I was like, of course I'm going to keep it going because it's a great business model.
Yeah.
It's I think if I just had the 6 retreats, I wouldn't have sustained the business because I don't think I would have had the people to fill
Mhm.
those retreats. So I think COVID, once again, for me, was a great big rug being pulled that worked.
Yeah.
I'm not saying COVID was a great thing because I know that obviously there is yeah, there are many issues with COVID. People with
Mhm.
long COVID, people who sadly lost people, people who couldn't see their loved ones, and it was,
Mhm.
there were a lot of tragedies that came from
Yeah.
COVID. But I do think you have to sometimes look at some positives. And I think
Mhm.
a positive that came out of COVID was that we all learned how to go online. And that meant that we could come together as communities. We
Mhm.
could seek solace in each other and we could learn new skills. So that
Yeah.
is a positive. And thankfully that's remained. People
Yeah.
still want to do that.
Yeah. Well, and it again, it just opened up the possibility to learn from these amazing people who maybe, people otherwise can't travel, or they don't have the means outside of viewing it in their home to access these things. And it just, COVID forced us to make everything more accessible, which I love. And it was hard because I was teaching at the time. So I had to very suddenly learn how to teach over Zoom to 8-year-olds. And I was like, oh, I was lucky in that I already had Chromebooks, little laptops in my classroom. So I had been teaching my kids how to use them all that whole time. So that when we shut down and they got them at home, they already knew how to use them. They already knew how to log into their learning sites. They already knew how to kind of navigate and use them. And so that was so, I was like, oh, thank God for that, because it would have been like other teachers struggled so much. And I felt so bad for them. But anyway, it also showed us that we can still connect, but also honor ourselves by being more realistic with where we're at. Like, I can't afford to travel. And even though I probably otherwise, before would have racked up debt on a credit card to go do something like that, now I don't have to. Or just even realizing that there are other possibilities out there for things like online classes and learning how to sew online. And um,
Yeah, and do you know
yeah.
something? There are a lot of people as well. I mean, one of the loveliest stories, and I don't know, I presume the lady in question has sadly now left this land,
Mm,
um, because there was a lovely moment when because I get to know people, and that's part of my thing. I love, I do welcome people in on the Zooms, on the classes. I
mhm,
host them. My teacher teaches, but I'm watching people all the time. So I make sure that if Betty in the corner is having an issue, I can see she's having an issue, and I will either direct message her or I'll just say, "Betty, are you okay?" And quite often Betty will have felt I can't put my hand up, but now she'll go, "Yes, I'm having a problem." And then we'll bring Betty in, and then we'll show her hands and we'll show Nicholas's hands, and the two of them will work it out together. And it's
mhm,
brilliant. So I am very much, I host, I'm there the whole time. I'm checking, I'm watching, I'm answering the questions.
mhm.
So I get to know my ladies. And there was a lady who used to bring a little white Scotty dog, and my nana had a dog. So every time she came in, I would go, have you got Mac? Have you got Mac the dog?" And she loved it. 'Cause it's like, "You remembered my little doggy."
Yeah.
So she would always bring Mac. We would always have a look at Mac at some point in the proceedings. But there was a lady, and I recognized that she was coming on a regular basis. But There was something about her, and so I just said to her, "Oh, it's so nice to have you back again in class." And she said, "I have got a terminal illness,
Mm,
and it I can't I couldn't possibly get COVID because it would kill me,
mhm,
like, immediately. She said, "You know, my immune system is so low." I
mhm,
suspect maybe it was cancer.
mm.
But she was very poorly, and she said, "So I live in the loft of my house now, and my family live downstairs." And she
Mm,
said, "And they have to literally deliver my food outside the room." And she said, "I am so lonely." And she said, "And your classes are just keeping me going
oh,
because I'm meeting other people, I'm meeting you, I'm talking." And she said, "Honestly, you don't know the life you are giving me whilst I still have my life."
oh,
Um, and it really struck me, and I would look out for her all the time, and then, of course, at some point, she stopped coming, and
mm,
sadly, I think she probably succumbed to her illness, but to
yeah,
know that for that time, she had comfort
mhm,
from that platform and from that community is fantastic, and I just love stories like that. It's
mhm,
great to be able to meet people like that.
yeah, and give them
Yeah,
something. I mean,
yeah.
it's a giving situation, like, you're giving your time, you're giving your effort, you're giving there's so much behind the scenes that those people are never gonna see, all the blood and sweat and tears and, talk about a good sob, when you're putting on especially big events and hosting and doing all the legwork to get teachers on board and to have everything working correctly for people. It's a lot, and
It's a lot. Yeah.
so when somebody can come to you and say, "Thank you so much for providing this for me," it's like, "Okay, this is why I'm doing this."
Yeah, exactly, exactly. You know,
Yeah.
one lady the other day just emailed me, and she just literally emailed me and said, "Oh, I did an American retreat this year,
Mhm,
hosted one, and she was on that retreat, but she also had been to my English retreats. She said she was looking forward to next year, but she only wrote a line or two. Hey, Rachel, I'm so looking forward to next year. Do let me know when America comes out because I'm planning the next American retreat for next year."
mhm.
And she said, "But I just thought I'd let you know about my husband, and he was ill." And so she was talking about that, and I felt so blessed that she wanted to email me
Yeah,
about that. And I wrote back, and I just thought, and I said to her, "I feel so honored that you've reached out to me in this way." So I think people do see me as their sort of friend or confidant, and I'm like that. I like that. I
yeah,
like it. Yes, it's a business. It's a business. I have to make a living,
sure.
but I like to think that I'm giving something back to people,
Mhm.
uh, in terms of not just providing a service. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. Do you think that, because you're not a quilter, that it gives you a unique perspective on, like, on having this business that provides quilting classes for quilters? Like, do you
Yes.
think it helps you stay out of maybe your own way in a sense?
Yes. I think it does, because what I do is that, as you said, with the planning, the way that I look for people to teach, I'm just constantly trawling Instagram. And if I see something that attracts me, I mean, I have a lot more knowledge now, but in
Mhm.
the past, I didn't know. I would not be able to tell you what that kind of sewing was, or I mean, I kind of knew, well, that looks quite modern and funky. Oh,
Yeah.
it's called improv, Rachel. Oh, okay. I didn't know. So I would just look at things that I liked, and then I would approach the teacher, which is just what I do, or the artist
Mhm,
on Instagram, and go, "Hey, I love what you do. Is this something you can teach? And would you like to do it with me?" And we have a chat. And then if we agree, we do the class.
mhm.
And so I think that does help, that I'm just basing it on what I think is interesting visually, rather than, I think if I was like a traditional quilter, I might only be looking at traditional quilting, and
Right.
then I would miss out on this whole improv section. And I think the thing with the business is that you are going to have people who are into traditional and improv, people who are into embroidery, people who want to learn how to design an FPP program, which we did with Scott Cully recently, pattern rather, sorry. You are going to have, it's crafting. As my
Mhm.
friend said to me once, it's not quilty monkeys, Rachel, it's crafty monkeys.
Yeah.
And I am trying to bring more crafts in. I've brought some art classes in. I've brought some
Mhm.
kind of meditative things in. They're not huge sellers. I think people still want what they want.
Mhm.
But it's like I do try and bring in different crafts. I brought in some knitting this year, and we're doing
Oh.
knitting again next year. So yeah, I think me just being appreciative of the art world and creativity and textiles and color,
Mhm.
uh, I am able to just look for all of those elements and bring those classes without going down one track. Well,
Yeah.
I'm a traditional quilter, so I'm only working with traditional quilters, and that's not,
Mhm.
like I say, I'm not judging anybody else what they do with their business,
Sure.
but I think that's a positive of Crafty Monkeys is that it is a whole range of things because I'm not,
Yeah.
stuck in one area.
Yeah. That's
Or part of
incredible.
one area is a better word to use. Part of one area. I don't want to say anybody's stuck. I'm not.
Yeah.
That's not. No one is stuck.
No, you're not.
People just choose their type of quilting, don't they? And tend to kind
Mhm.
of stay in their lane, kind of thing. I think.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I think sometimes, you know, people branch out or they try different things and they end up going back to the thing that makes them feel the most successful or that they get the most out of.
Yes.
So whether you've tried all the different types, I mean, I don't know if you can actually try all the different types of quilting that there are out there, but if you've dabbled in multiple different kinds of approaches to quilting, I find that for me at least, I kind of end up back where I started because that's where I'm comfortable, but also that's where I get the most joy from because I can be more successful. I think I'm always in support of trying something new and pushing your boundaries and getting out of your comfort zone to test your limits and find out who you are underneath everything else. And sometimes it just is kind of ugly. And and then I go, we're gonna not look at that one. We're gonna come back over here where we're safe and happy. But I think it's incredible that you're providing so many opportunities because I think there are some outlets where or even, local quilt shops, it's like you kind of see the same type of classes pop up all the time. And it can be hard because it's like, well, I don't want to learn how to do that. Like that's not interesting to me, or I don't find that appealing aesthetically. So why would I spend my time and money on that if I don't even like looking at it? And so for there to be an opportunity to learn from world-renowned teachers and from different areas of the crafty world, we'll call it, because it's not just quilting, like you said, but it gives more people an opportunity, more opportunities to find new things to learn or to just hone their skills in the thing that they already love. And I think that's important that it doesn't have to be all new all the time, but it can't just always only be the traditional path either, because you'll miss so many people if you don't branch out. So
Yeah.
I love
And I
that.
think, I think, like you say, when you try the word joy, I think is a really important word. I think we've got to get joy from things in our life, got to seek joy and find joy and have joy.
Mhm,
And I think there is joy in trying new things. But I think, like you said there about all the different disciplines, there's a lady called Julie who has been a member of, I have a club as well, and I change it every year. It's called the VIP Club, but I change it every year. So the
mhm,
first year was 3 quilting blocks and then 3 projects to make from those quilting blocks. So we called it Take 3.
mhm,
And then the next year it changed into the VIP, and every month was a different discipline. So you learned mixed media one month, and then another month you learned some traditional quilting, Hawaiian applique, free motion the next month, a bit of
mhm.
improv the next month. And so it was like every month it was like a taste testing.
Yeah.
And Julie has been with me for 4 years. And now she's in our latest club called Under the Sea, where I've got some amazing artists that are creating a quilt. I'm actually going to enter it in the Festival of Quilts next year.
Ah,
And our students are learning along with them. So Victoria Vanderland did the base of the quilt, and then Sarah Hibbert, is it Cornerstone Quilts? Cornerstone Quilts has done the next layer. So she's doing kind of scrapbooking, turning into fabric
mhm,
collage. Then the next layer is Scott Cully, who of course won at QuiltCon. He's
yeah.
just done FPP.
Mm.
The next one is Russell because he's doing sustainable quilting.
Mhm.
And then the next one is going to be Jenny Pickett, who's doing traditional quilting. She's actually going to do Above the Sea.
Oh, wow.
So it'll be one long quilt. And then Trudy Wood is actually going to do the quilting and talk about how to design the quilting when you get this piece. And then this piece hopefully will be displayed at festival. And my students, this is all recorded content. So they just log in every month and they watch the content. Julie has been with me now for years. And she just created her base, I think maybe 2 layers actually of her quilt. And I put this on the Instagram feed, I can absolutely see the development in her and her confidence.
Mhm.
And you can see the way she's now thinking about color that comes together
Mhm.
and texture and shape, some improv stuff. She's really, and she said herself, she's picking up on everything she's learned. And
Mhm.
what's lovely about Julie is, I think she's probably in her 50s. And she said that she always wanted to be an artist when she was younger. And then she went to typing school and she had her life.
Yeah.
And then she retired. And she said, and now she feels like she's going back to like doing a college degree. And it sparked that youth in her. And isn't that fantastic?
Mhm.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is about trying different disciplines, because even if you do a bit of improv and you're a traditional quilter and you do a bit of improv and you think, well, I'm never going to sit down and do an improv quilt, I bet that improv class will teach you about something which you can use in your traditional quilting.
Mhm.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
If you're an improver, take a traditional, look at a cathedral window.
Yeah.
You'll learn something from that you'll put in your improv. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
So I think it is important to try new things. And that's what I try to encourage on the platform. Yeah.
Yeah. That's important. I think the more experiences you have with different things, things that are different from what you're used to, or whether it's in crafting or culture or, traveling
Yes.
around or meeting different kinds of people, it just broadens your worldview so that you can be more informed. You can your experiences can come back to what you love, and it can inform that and shape how you move through that now that you have all those different experiences. And I know I learned long arming within the year that I started quilting because I was trying to rent the machines and, spending all this time. And I was like, I just need to get my own. So I convinced my parents to start the business with me. And now I'm taking it over, and which is great because that was kind of always the vision, was eventually I'd get to a place where I could take it over. But I like knowing all the parts, being able to long arm my own quilts and do everything from start to finish opened my eyes to a lot of things of like why you do certain things in quilting, especially if you are going to long arm your quilts. I think for if people quilt their own on their domestics, that's fine. That's a different thing. But for long arming specifically, there's certain things that need to be in place and need to be done properly for your quilt to come out nicely. And that made me a better piecer. So long arming made me a better piecer. And then having worked with different mediums now, like I've finally done some FPP and I've done curves and I've done all these different things because of the business of people hiring me. I want this quilt. And I go, yeah, okay, I'll make it. And I'm like, oh my God, I've never done this before. you know, I talk with
Yeah.
them and I'm trying to build up confidence in them. And behind the scenes, I'm like, Mom, what do I do? And she's like, well, one step at a time, because I've never done
Yeah.
this either. So, but I know I have
Yeah.
the skills to do that thing. I just need to apply it to that technique, if that makes sense. So,
Mm, mm.
but it's just incredible how quickly your repertoire, what you have in your toolkit as far as like the skills you have and the things can grow exponentially because you learned one new skill or one new technique, because then you're like, oh wait, I can actually do that over here and that's going to improve this part of this type. It's it's endless, the possibilities of when you include something new into what you already know. There's infinite ways it can apply to every area of your life, not just your hobby or your craft, but in every aspect.
And that's what life's about, right?
Mhm.
That's what life's about. It's about
Mhm.
experiencing new things,
Yeah.
you know? I remember going to primary school as a helper for my daughter's class. And one day we had to take in some foods.
Mhm.
And so I took in like some coconut, like as in proper, like we all smashed the shell,
Yeah.
and they had coconut.
Yeah.
And, there were so many kids. I mean, my daughter, she just ate everything. Ate everything. She was even better than me because in France, she ate snails. And I
Oh,
looked at them and went, I
absolutely
just
not.
can't. I just
Absolutely not.
can't. Because all I
Yeah.
could visualize was little snails in my garden. But she was like, I'm going to do it. She was only 11, and she ate a snail. So,
Wow.
and she enjoyed it. She would eat them again. But
Okay.
she did used to eat everything.
Mhm.
And I went to this classroom and there were so many kids who went, I don't like coconut. And I said, oh, you've tried it though, right? No. How do you know you don't like it then? I don't like it. But you haven't tried it. And then
Mhm.
this little boy, I remember Alfie, he said, go on, I'll try it. And he got the tiniest piece. And then he went, ooh, ooh. And then he had a bit. And I said, there you go, Alfie. There's your life lesson. You
Mhm.
know, try these things.
Mhm.
So I'm a firm believer. You have to try things. And if
Yeah.
you try it and you don't like it, if you eat that piece of coconut and you think, I will never do that again, it's disgusting. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter. You've learned something. You've learned you
Yeah.
don't like coconut.
Right.
But how will you know? Because you might try it and then just want to devour the whole thing. And from
Yeah.
then on, buy coconuts. And
Right.
so,
No, exactly. Yeah.
you got to try.
Yeah. Well, my husband and I were literally just having this conversation last night because um he he came back from El Camino de Santiago a different person. Like, I mean, he's still my husband and it's fine, but there's just something has changed in him. And we were talking about, I was telling you before that he and our son went to the tallest peak here in Idaho is called Mount Bora, and there's you get to a point on the trail and it's called Chicken Out Ridge because not everybody, but people chicken out when they get to that point because from there on you're just on this tiny ridge and it's just death on either side. And he was like, you could have made it to Chicken Out Ridge. He's like, I don't know that you would have gone past that. And I was like, no, I definitely wouldn't have because that doesn't interest me. I don't want to be looking down at my death as I'm trying to stay on this like sharp rock face.
Yeah.
And so he was like, I really would like to go do some more hikes, maybe some backpacking, just like a one night camping thing. Um, before it gets too cold because I'm just really feeling the need to just like be out and the simplicity of that, like your only purpose is to just walk and get to the next place and, whatever. I'm like, well, that's better than running away from all of our responsibilities because that would not be good. But anyway, so I was like, oh well, I'd like to, if you do a backpacking one, like I would like to go with you. And he's like, but you don't like camping. You don't, I would be so worried about you and all this stuff. And I was like, you know what though? I didn't like camping as a kid. The last time I camped was with them, my husband and our boys for mountain biking, and that wasn't fun because we had to be up early and it was just like a mad dash. The whole weekend was just a mad dash. I didn't like that because it was just so fast paced. There was no time to just relax and everything was dirty and the boys were stinky and it was just a long weekend, and so it wasn't like there was no leisure in it. And I'm like, yeah, but I even though I was only on the Camino officially for 3 days, those 3 days also changed my brain. I climbed a mountain
Mm,
and um I was like, I just it's in my pursuit of continuing to try to be a person who doesn't say I don't like that if I've never tried it.
yes.
Or and I'm if I'm honest, I'll say I don't want to try that thing because it doesn't interest me. I said, but I liked being out there. I liked walking. I liked pushing myself physically. I liked, in the moment it hurt and I was tired and I wanted to stop a lot. I said, but when we got to the end and we were in our next destination and we got there, I was like, okay, okay. I'm like, so I've never backpacked. Like you've done it a couple times and we didn't do it in Spain, but it was close, and I was like, so I know I can carry a pack full of the things that I need. And I know I can sleep in a tent for a night. I'll be fine. And, there's just this whole thing of like, I don't want to be that kid that's like, I don't like that because I just don't like the look of it versus actually doing it and then being able to say, yeah, that's not for me. I'm glad I tried it, but now I'm going to move on. It's, it's a lifestyle. It's a whole mindset. It's a whole, you know, taking action versus just saying words. And I'm striving every day to be more of that kind of person.
Yeah.
So anyway. enough about me. Um,
No, do you know, I read a great quote today. Somebody sent me it, and I've just turned my phone off, so I can't look at it, but it was by
mm,
Confucius, and it said something like, I'm misquoting, but it said something like, "Is it you only have one life until you realize you do, and then you take the second life," or something like that. I
mm,
think what it was meaning was, you know, you only have one life until you really understand that your life is going to end, and that's when you start living. That's when you start choosing
yeah,
different options, or you begin to live again. It was something like that. That's when
yeah,
you choose to live, or something like that.
hmm,
Um, yeah, it was.
yeah,
I thought that was a really interesting quote
yeah,
because that's very true. It's very
yeah,
true. We do take our lives for granted. We just think they're going
yeah.
to go on forever.
Hmm. We don't want to think about the end, and it's
No.
become very taboo in,
Yeah.
you know, certain realms of, it's like, especially, I think, I can only speak for America because that's where I'm at, but being American and living, being raised in evangelical Christianity, like, it's very like doom and gloom, fire and brimstone. If you're not a good enough person, you're definitely going to burn for eternity, but you're not ever quite sure if you're being good enough. And like, just the mess that is. And when I finally was able to let go of all that and, come to and accept and fully embrace what I do believe now, it changed everything. And it's like, oh, well, I want to experience everything. I don't want to shelter myself. I don't want to close everything off. And then also facing that fear of death, because I think instead of talking about it and trying to understand it and what that's going to be like, how am I going to experience it when the people I love die or if they pass before me? Like, it just closes off your worldview, I think. And so that quote is incredible because it's like, once you realize that you have a choice in how you experience your life and that we're all going to die anyway, so you might as well try the things that you want to try. It changes your brain. There's like a switch that flips and you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
And that yearning to go experience the world and go see things and do things and meet people and try things it's almost insatiable. So I love seeing people try new things. I love helping people try new things or experience new things because it just means like, okay, we've got one more person now on their path to go find their full life and not just live by default anymore. And I think so many of us do that because we don't know what else to do. So, and you
Mm.
clearly took that path because you you went from being a TV host to hosting these crafty classes that it's not your world, but it was in some way. It wasn't that big of a leap. It's, for some people, it might be like, oh, you're not even a quilter. Why would you do this? Well, you're almost the perfect person for that because you're not a quilter. You can be outside of it and not be attached too much to any of it to get stuck in any one spot. And so,
And also the hosting thing, because I'd presented for so
yeah,
many years.
yeah.
And before the craft thing, I was actually doing like regular terrestrial television. And
Mm,
like I hosted a quiz show on daytime television on one of the main channels that was a live show. So I had to literally, I would have contestants before the show in the green room who were all like, yeah, cha, 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 yeah, 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 yeah. And then we would start and I would go, hello, welcome. You know, it's so nice to have you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rachel. I'm your host. And today we have got, and I would say their names,
mhm.
you know, whoever it was, got Stephen. And the camera would go to Stephen and he would be like a rabbit in the headlights. It's
Like,
like, and I would go, so how are you today? And my job as the host would be to bring these people out of themselves, to
mhm,
relax them, to bring them out, to get them chatting, to get them to join in, to get them to laugh together.
yeah,
That was my job. And I did that for 2 years.
yeah,
So, you know, that's in a way, it's like that was a transferable skill
yeah,
that I've brought to the business. And that's when I work with quilters, I don't think they kind of get it until teachers I'm talking about, until the end of the class, where they go, "Oh, you're such a good host. Thank you so much for hosting that class with me." Because I make their job easy in terms of
Hmm.
they are there to teach. They're not there to, look for the questions and the chat and monitor and look at the timings and make sure Betty's okay.
Yeah.
They are there to teach. That's what I want people to
Right.
do. I want them to focus on their skills that they are teaching. And
Yeah.
so that's why I host it. But also, I'm able to kind of work the room. And I
Hmm.
don't mean that in a really cynical way. I mean that, like I've just said with those people, I
Yeah.
wanted those people on that show to have a brilliant time. I didn't want them to
Right.
go home thinking, oh,
Hmm.
why didn't I answer that question? Why didn't I say anything? I wanted them to walk away and think that was a great experience. And
Yeah.
that's exactly the same with Crafty Monkeys. I want everybody to leave those Zoom windows or the retreats feeling like they've had the best time. And I have to say, apart from, I'm just trying to think of someone who hasn't had a good time. There was a lady who wrote a review recently. She had only done quilting, and fair play to her,
Hmm.
she tried an art class that I put on,
Hmm.
and she wrote that it wasn't for her.
Hmm.
Uh, she didn't like it as much as the other classes, and it wasn't for her. And I wrote back and I said, I'm sorry that, it wasn't for you, but you've tried something new. You probably won't do it again. And the guy who was teaching, uh, it was more about kind of like going with the flow and learning how for your charcoal to become part of you. It was,
Hmm.
I mean, he's not from LA, but it was, if I say it was a little bit LA, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Sure.
And it was a great class, I felt. I really like him. He's quite out there. But for her, it just wasn't working in her parameter. But
Sure.
that's one of the occasions. But I
Hmm.
have to say, in the sewing, mostly people have a brilliant time. And if they don't, they send me an email and go, I really enjoyed myself. But maybe this could be slightly changed. If you run the class next time,
Hmm.
maybe you could do less of this
Mm.
and maybe more of that, because as a participant, I felt this. Now, of course, it's like when you go on Trustpilot and you look at a hotel's reviews and everybody is great apart from Betty, who said, I didn't like the check-in staff, they were rude. And you
Hmm.
go, well, who are you, Betty? Because everybody else is having a great time at that hotel. So you
Right.
always have to be careful, but I'm
Right.
always mindful. I always listen to feedback and I do change things. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're right. Sometimes that lady who says that is actually making a valid point.
Yeah.
And I'll say to the teacher, the next time we run it, could we divide? And that teacher will say, yeah, I felt the same thing. I felt like I had to race through that content.
Hmm.
Right. So let's change it the next time then. I'm very fluid. I'm very fluid. And maybe that's why it's successful, because things change all the time and I listen to people. I listen
Yeah.
to what they want.
Yeah. I think that's a skill in and of itself, to not take things
Mm.
personally and think,
Yes,
is this something I can use, or do I just need to let this one roll off my back and say, you know what, thank you for participating. I'm sorry that this wasn't for you, but I sure hope that in the future I provide a class that it interests you and that you can join us again. It's like, okay.
exactly.
And if you take things from that perspective, if you don't take everything personally, and you think about that person's perspective, like, what are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to express versus, like, how dare they talk to me that way? Like, it's not about you usually, it's about them and their experience and what they wanted from something, or maybe they just weren't in a space where they could accept whatever that experience was supposed to be. And it's interesting to be able to take that view of things, and not to say that everything just rolls off your back and that you don't take things personally, but the more you can try not to. And when you see, at least for me, when I see companies respond accordingly because they've gotten feedback and they've gone, you know what, I hear you, we've gotten this comment or this feedback multiple times, we're working on it, and
Mm,
then you
mm,
see that change, it's like,
yeah,
oh, thank you so much for listening.
yeah.
And I think those are the companies that gain loyalty, because they're listening to their customers, they're listening to the people who use their services.
But yeah, I think, like you say, it's to listen to people really and not take things personally.
I love to hear that it's overwhelmingly positive for you, because I think what you're providing is really incredible. And I hope to join a class sometime soon. And I think because I spend most of my day sewing for other people, I do kind of find it hard to then, because I was leaving, going to my parents' house, doing my job, coming back home, and then it was like, okay, I have all these other things to do and take care of. But now that I'll be working from home and all of my sewing things will be here, and I don't have to like separate, I feel like I'll be able to get a lot more of my own personal sewing in, and so I'm really excited and really looking forward to that. So hopefully I can join. But also I want to ask, so you did your American retreat in New York, correct?
Well,
Or
Pennsylvania, yeah,
Pennsylvania. Okay.
and
But
then
you
I
visited
spent
New
time
York
in I
because you wanted
visited
to.
New
Yeah.
York afterwards, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So Pennsylvania. And then and you said you want to plan another one for next year. Where are you looking, East Coast
Yes.
again or?
I am well, yes, because I did
Okay.
wanna go to West Coast, to be honest, but then it's so expensive. I wanted to do
Right.
San Francisco, but it's like, okay, if I can
Yeah.
charge people $3,000 for a retreat, that's fine, but that's not gonna happen.
Right.
So I'm actually now looking at Vermont,
Okay.
and I want to go in the fall. So I'm looking at September 25, and
Okay.
I've just found a hotel, so I'm just in the process of talking to them right now. Because I was talking to some people in Charlotte, but Charlotte, once again, incredibly expensive. Because
Mm-hmm.
I did the retreat was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so it was
Mm.
quite a bit out of the way. Um, but I wanted to get nearer to an airport, and then I just thought I've always wanted to see the fall.
Yeah.
So in Vermont, so yeah, I've chosen, and Vermont is quite close to Canada, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got quite a few Canadians, so I'm hoping they could hop the border and come over. So that's
Yeah.
my next, that'll be. I'm hoping that will be online in the next month, to
Okay.
be booked for September next year.
Okay. Well, we'll look for that because that's exciting. And the fact that that you can start bringing it over to the States is kind of
Yeah.
fun. And, it's like you start things and you just never really envision maybe fully where it could go. And so when you finally start to get those like bigger steps, it's probably feels really, I could imagine feels really exciting to go, oh my gosh, there's enough interest that I can do this in the States.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know how it was going to go when I did the thing in the States. I thought, will
Hmm.
anybody actually turn up? I know people do Zooms, but I know the States is a massive place. And
Hmm.
so it was like, if I put something on in Lancaster, what about the people who follow me in Texas? Are they really going to fly? Well, they did. One lady did.
Yeah.
So yeah, people came from all across the States. We had about, I think it was 36 people there on that retreat,
Oh, wow.
which was fantastic. And to say that it was just, once again, it was an idea in my head. And then I thought, I'm just going to do it. And I
Yeah.
found the hotel and put it on the website and just crossed my fingers.
Yeah.
And then people booked. So,
Yeah.
and then Nicholas Ball and Sarah Hibbert and I flew over with my family,
Hmm.
who all helped out, and everybody loved them. And it was great. It was great. It was
Yeah.
great. People were great.
That's so fun. And so fun to just, yeah, experience those growth moments and go, oh my
Yeah.
God, I did it. Like,
Yeah.
how
And I'll do
incredible
it
is that
again.
feeling? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
now the seal is broken. Now you can accomplish that, and that there's interest and that people will show up. And I think that's
Yeah.
the scariest part of starting anything and or taking your business into a new realm, even if it's the same stuff, right? It's the same retreat, it's the same stuff, but it's in a new place.
Yeah.
Like, is this going to work? And then when it works, it's like, okay, thank you. And sometimes it doesn't work and you just have to roll with the punches, but that willingness to try new things and that willingness to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, I think that's how you grow. That's how you make your businesses successful, and that's how you find new people and find new ways to accomplish your goals. And so it's really incredible to be able to see that happening in real time. And it's inspiring to me because I'm in that same boat where I'm like, okay, I need to start pushing or my business is gonna die. And so yeah, it's like getting ready and it's like, okay, Rachel did it. These other people, it's like I'm watching all these other people do it. And I'm like, okay, I can do it too. I can be that person and
Yeah.
just
Just
really
try.
push. Yeah, just try for those things. So that's really cool. What else I was gonna ask you? Oh, so then yeah, you have Breaking the Blocks, your podcast where you interview quilters and crafters and talk about, the blocks in life that we have to overcome and climb over to achieve our goals or to keep moving forward. And so what brought that about? And yeah, like how did you get that started?
Well, once again, that was a tough time. So I started the podcast. I came up with the idea in November last year,
Mm,
and then it started. I think it officially launched at the end of January, beginning of February this year. So it's baby. So
okay.
season one has just finished, and I think there were 17 episodes. So I've had a month off in August, and depending on when you put this out, it should be running again. So yeah, breaking the blocks. I had been talking to a lot of people in classes, as I mentioned, the lady who was using her creativity to help her in this very difficult time when she was with a terminal illness.
Mhm.
So I really began to understand that creativity and, crafting and quilting was more than just wanting to learn how to piece bits of fabric together. It was definitely something that is becoming more prevalent in our mental well-being.
Yeah.
If you look at any Instagram account or whatever, people are talking about mental health and
Mhm.
how creativity is so important because it gives us that 25-minute solace or hour solace or however long it is. Also, I'd been doing on the YouTube channel as well for CraftyMonkies, a thing with a very good friend of mine who's an artist called Gary Mills. And we did this thing called a tea time tutorial. And it started out, I said, you know what, because the YouTube channel has got loads of quilting content that I've used from previous quilters that I've worked with.
Mhm.
So that you can learn to do a block. But I said, why don't you teach me some art techniques and then we'll put that out on YouTube and show people that even if they're like me, who have never really, done these things, they can do them.
Mhm.
And he said, let's do it. So we did that every other Friday and put that content out on YouTube, which is all there to see. We did it for a year and a half. All the stuff behind me is all the things that I made, all these little pictures. And we would like paint with a plastic bag. But what we aimed to do was give people a 20-minute art tutorial where all you needed was a plastic bag and some kids' poster paints
Mhm.
or a needle and thread.
Mhm.
And we would do a 20-minute mindful exercise that would just take you away from your computer, take you away from your smartphone, and just do something. And in that year that I worked with Gary, it was really interesting because although we started off about, learning to create things, I mean, I've always been creative, although I'm not a sewer, I've always been creative. My
Yeah.
dad used to paint with me. He was a divorced father. He would pick me up on a weekend and we would craft together.
Mhm.
So we would paint, we would draw, we would etch, we would make things. My dad used to make his own model airplanes, the ones
Oh,
that
yeah.
flew.
Mhm.
I don't mean just like little models that sit on a desk. I
Yeah.
mean the ones that you actually fly with
Yeah.
you know what I mean,
Yeah.
transmitter.
Yeah.
So he always had a camera around his neck when I was younger. So he was very creative. And my mother used to work in a sewing factory, and my grandma was a big baker. So I've
Mhm.
always been creative. So it kind of reignited it in me. But what I discovered over that year was the really fantastic benefits that I got from recording that session with Gary. Because actually, we started doing it, it began every week when we first started, it was every week.
Mhm.
And I looked forward to that session. I looked forward to that hour that I was going to record with Gary because I was actually going to paint and I was giving myself that time.
Mhm.
So I started thinking about creativity and what it does for us and how it helps our mental health. But what coincided with that was that my dad sadly passed away in October 22. And before he died, we had a big fallout, a huge fallout where I said, I'm leaving. I'm never coming back to this house. And he said, I don't want you to. And we fell out.
Mhm.
And then about 9 weeks later, I got the call. I knew he had blood cancer,
Mhm.
but I got the call that said he's not going to last the weekend. He actually lasted for 2 weeks. And
Mhm.
luckily, I was able to go and see him in the hospital and in the hospice. Um, there were issues with his partner,
Mhm.
which I won't go into. So I wasn't able to spend the time that I really wanted to when he was in his kind of dying moments.
Mhm.
She was always there. But we did steal some time together and we were able to talk about some things. And, that had a huge impact on me. And then he died.
Yeah.
And I am glad that I was able to have that time with him. But sadly, we had that falling out. And for the previous 3 years, uh, our relationship had changed And if my dad was alive today, I know that he would sit here and say, I became very self-absorbed. I mean,
Mhm.
he became obsessed with death.
Mm.
As soon as he got I mean, my dad had always suffered from anxiety,
Mm.
and I tried to help him overcome it. And as he got older, it got worse.
Mhm.
And then because he was 80 when he died, he was, you know, going into old age and things were going wrong. He started to become absolutely hyper fixated on his health.
Mm.
Um, so much so that I think he just kind of made himself in the end ill. I'm not saying you can bring on blood cancer mentally at all. I'm
No.
not saying that. It's an actual illness.
Right.
But I do think that stress, and it's known that stress affects, I mean, it's called disease,
Mhm.
dis-ease in the body. It's
Right.
dis-ease.
Mhm.
And I do think that if we're stressed, we can make ourselves feel very poorly.
Yeah.
And I think that my dad did have a lot of mental issues that
Mhm.
affected his physical health. He became very reclusive. He became very anxious.
Yeah.
And it all started to decline. And then our relationship started to decline because I would try and help him and I couldn't help him. And then his partner didn't really understand mental illness.
Mm.
She was like, well, he's got nothing to worry about. What's wrong with him? And I said, that's not what mental illness is about. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter how much money you've got in the bank. So it became a very strained relationship,
Mhm.
which then on one occasion just blew up,
Yeah.
just exploded, and we parted ways. As I say, luckily got to see him again.
Yeah.
But there were a few things after he died that I found out that were upsetting. Um, and so the podcast, it was an idea that I just came up with in the November, because it had been a year since he died at that point.
Mhm.
And in that year, I'd really had to try and heal my childhood wounds
Mhm.
because all of this trauma came up from his death, from us having the argument. And I really had to sit down and think about how the divorce had affected me of my parents and
Mhm.
his behavior and things like that. So I kind of had to work on all of those issues. And in working on all those issues, first of all, the sessions with Gary
Mhm.
really helped me because
Yeah.
that's why I looked forward to those weekly sessions, because there were points in that year where I was on the floor, really devastated by the death of my father, devastated by what had happened. A lot of childhood trauma came back.
Mhm.
Um, and so I really had to work on myself in that year, but the creative sessions helped me.
Yeah.
And then I thought about all the stories I'd heard, and it all came together.
Yeah.
And I just thought, hang on, what are we doing in our lives? Yeah, we are breaking the blocks. We have
Mhm.
to overcome these blocks. We have to overcome these challenges. And of course, in the quilting world, a block is a thing.
Yeah.
So it just kind of worked as a kind of side thing with CraftyMonkies, that obviously I work with amazing quilters.
Mhm.
But I'm now starting to talk to other people, and some students are coming on the podcast because they've all had trauma as well. And I'm
Yeah.
talking to them about how their creativity has helped them. So yeah, that's why I created it. And I wanted to also have a forum where we could, first of all, try and get people to do something creative, and see that it can be a help. But I also wanted to share people's stories, because I think sometimes you can sit there in the world and think you are the only person going through that right now. You
Yeah.
are the only person that has been diagnosed with ADHD at 40, like one of
Mhm.
my guests, or has suffered a bereavement, or has had an abusive childhood. I mean, I know we all know people have abusive childhoods, but I think sometimes
Yeah.
you can just really believe you're the only person feeling that pain, that maybe
Right.
people who've had those experiences, they've got over them because they look okay, because they're on
Mhm.
social media and they're dancing. And
Right.
they're like Jerry in Stitches, who I interviewed for the podcast. All of her reels were her twirling and singing and doing amazing transitions.
Mhm.
And then I did the interview. And during the interview, halfway through, she suddenly announced, as a child, I was abused by my stepfather. And it was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And she said, is that a bad thing to say? And I said, no. And then we talked about it. And afterwards, I got an email from someone who said, I don't know how you get so deep in your podcasts. Very much like you, there's no questions, we just talk.
Yeah.
But this lady said, I suffered very similar abuse. And
Mm.
I listened to that podcast, and seeing how Jerry has overcome it through her creativity, through lessons she's learned, through all of these experiences has given me hope and inspiration. And I'm now going to start on my own journey
Mhm.
to overcome this trauma.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic again. So once again, the podcast came about because of my own traumas, but also I wanted to share those stories from other people and
Yeah.
give people hope and give people inspiration
Mhm.
and let people know that you are not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
Yeah. I think
So
that's
that's
the biggest. Oh, go ahead.
no, that's it.
Oh,
That's where it came from.
okay. Yeah, and I think the sharing of stories and realizing you're not alone is such a huge, it can be a huge relief when you're lost, or if you're trying to figure out how to muddle your way through, traumatic events, or you never know when childhood trauma or anything can come back and hit you in a different way. And um I've just experienced another, a wave of experiencing new, finding out new depths of things that have occurred in my life, and having to kind of rehash it when you think you've dealt with it. It's like, oh shit, it's still there and it doesn't go away. But hearing other people's stories lightens the load, or being able to share your story with other people lightens that load if you allow other people to carry it with you. And my husband is actually in his final year of getting a master's degree to become a therapist. And so, all these things I'm like learning along with him, and just all these things. It's community is so huge, and for some people that's what it takes. But for a lot of people, they need therapy, and the crafting and the creating and the doing something with your hands is so helpful and can be so therapeutic, and give you that release of energy, and help you, make something beautiful amongst the shit that is in front of you, facing, that you're facing in your life. And so I just think that's really beautiful that, even though it was born out of your own tragic experience with your dad and your own pain, I think being able to reach out to other people and say, let's talk about yours. Like, here's a place where you can talk about this with me, and we can shed some light on it. It doesn't have to be buried in the dark anymore.
Yeah. And one of
Um,
my favorite episodes was with Scott Cully because I'd seen his quilt, and it's called I think it's called The Shadow or Just Shadow.
yeah.
And it's actually a picture of his dad, age 17, and it's made up of tiny, 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 tiny pieces. And when you step back, you see the face,
Hmm.
but it's in shadow. And that's why I reached out to him. I mean, in the end, he's ended up now teaching for me, and he's just done my, VIP content for me. But I reached out to him for the podcast and said, I loved your quilt. It blew me away, but it really touched something within me because you mentioned that you had a difficult relationship with your father. So he said, yeah. I said, would you talk about that? And he was like, yeah, sure. So we did this interview, and, he talked about the fact that he hadn't talked to his father in years, and
Mm.
it doesn't know why, and and the shadow parts of our personalities, and how we, these traumas that we experience develop our personal traits and personal habits. And I think it's about learning about triggers. And for
Hmm.
me, I'd always, because my dad wasn't emotionally available as well. He was a
Hmm.
man of great emotion. He just couldn't show it. And
Hmm.
so I grew up then always seeking approval for people and seeking out emotionally unavailable people because they were like my dad. But then that led to me constantly chasing people and
Hmm.
expecting everybody else to validate me,
Hmm.
and all of these behavioral issues that I had. And I pushed so many people away,
Yeah.
and hurt people, in that uh, trauma,
Hmm.
and hurt people in having to get those needs met,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So that's what I've had to work on, and I'm still not a perfect person, but that's what I've had to work on.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I wanted to kind of highlight that really and
Yeah.
show that we all have a story.
Yeah.
We all have a story.
Yeah. And I think it can be easy to be like, well, mine wasn't that bad, but it's like, but it's yours. It's something you carry. So it was that bad, whatever it was. And not to say bad or good, but just don't discount yourself just because it wasn't the same as someone else's. It still impacted you. It still shaped who you are and how you view the world. And I think, like, back to kind of that concept of like getting to know yourself so that you can understand your own triggers, your own traumas, your own responses to that, what that looks like for you and why, you can start to see other people. And
Yes.
they're
And not be so judgmental. You know what's doing my
right.
head in at the moment? What drives me crazy is this whole thing about narcissism
Mm,
on the Instagram, on the internet.
yeah.
Because I know you and I've talked about narcissism, and yes, there are real narcissists out
Hmm.
there. But you know, even narcissists are really hurt people.
Really hurt.
It comes from trauma, you
Yeah,
know. But I think that
absolutely.
there are so many, we have to be so careful how we judge people. As you
Hmm.
just said, you have to get to know people. And
Hmm.
that's not to say that the people out there who are abusive or abusing people, oh, we should all stroke them back and go, oh, we feel sorry for you because you've had trauma. No, you have to take accountability for your behavior and you mustn't hurt people.
Right.
But I think, you know, we're so quick to judge now, like on Instagram. Oh, he's a narcissist.
Hmm.
Is he? Or is it just someone who is actually an avoidant? Is he someone who's avoiding
Yeah.
certain things, or she is avoiding her emotions? In a
Right.
way, I was an avoidant
Hmm.
because when I did get someone who absolutely loved the ground I walked on, I would push them away because it didn't feel like home to me.
Yeah.
But actually, home wasn't a great thing.
Yeah.
So we all have these issues.
Hmm.
But I think you have to not be so judgy and so judgmental and wipe people off straight away because of their behavior.
Yeah.
Obviously, as I say, if you are in an abusive situation, first of all, try and get out of it. And that person needs to get therapy to
Yeah.
stop hurting other people. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that I think sometimes we can meet people, there's something going on there, there's some pain there.
Right.
So it's important to not judge people so hastily
Hmm.
when it is kind of like that, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, it's like you said, you don't want to keep enabling hurtful behavior, but at the same time, you don't have to be so rushed to judge someone's behavior as narcissistic or as abusive. It's like, okay, you didn't like what they did. Have you tried talking to them? Have you said, I don't like the way you just treated me? And is there a resolution to that before you write them off and say, well, they're just an asshole? It's like, well, okay, but do you know why that it's like, again, back to personal responsibility. I'm like, I'm all up on that because I think that is a huge part of what people in our society are missing is that personal responsibility for their own choices, their
Yes,
own behavior. They want to blame their parents. And like, sure,
exactly.
you are the way you are because of how you were raised. Everybody is in that boat. We're all the way we are because of how we were raised. But like, what are you doing with it? How are you moving through the world with that? And are you negatively impacting other people because you're not dealing with your own perspective on the world and so you're making everybody else miserable around you? Or are you actively trying to understand yourself and move more gently through the world, therefore, allowing people to come to you and say, that thing you did, it really bothered me. And if you can take that and you can listen to it, and it might hurt in the moment, but go, oh, this person has my best interest because they want to see me thrive and be a good person, then it's like, when you can take it from that way, then you can have some healing. But I think if you can't take responsibility for your behavior and you try to blame everybody else or project on that's another kind of, I think that's where like the blaming and the judging, it's like you're projecting your own shortcomings on other people so that you don't have to take responsibility for it.
And I
um
still do that. I think
sure.
the other day my husband said, "You're projecting." And I was like, "You are so right. You're so
You are.
right." I still do it. I'm not, as I
Yeah.
say, I'm not a paragon of virtue sat here. I'm still a work in
No.
progress, but I'm beginning to understand myself more. I'm
Yeah.
beginning to understand where my failings are and where the behavior is coming from. And
Yeah.
but yeah, it's it's a work in progress. I'm still
Yeah.
getting things wrong. But it's becoming aware of those things.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing, and trying to work things out. and boundaries. And I think that works on the opposite way. Like you say, part of your responsibility has, well, what part am I playing in this? So if
Mhm.
you are staying in a relationship that is narcissistic, a
Mhm.
narcissistic relationship, you know, that's where you have to put your boundaries up and say, okay, well, I'm now going to protect myself and walk away from this,
Yeah.
because I can't help you. And by staying with you, I'm enabling you. So
Right.
I have to walk away from this. So
Mhm.
that's part of it as well.
Mhm.
But I do understand. And once again, I'm not being flippant,
No.
because there are many situations where people are in abusive relationships, and it's very difficult to walk away from those relationships. Difficult to walk away because a lot of abusive people, obviously, they do feel guilt and shame, so they turn their behavior around for a while, and then
Mhm.
it goes back to where it was because they
Yep.
haven't dealt with the issues. But also, you know, a lot of people are stuck.
Mhm.
How do I support myself? I've got
Mhm.
children with this person. What do I do? These are all very difficult things. So I don't want to sit
Yeah.
here at all and be saying, well, you just walk away. No, it's
Just
not that
leave.
easy.
Yeah.
But I think if you're in a relationship or you're in a friendship with someone, then you know you are also part of that relationship. And if it's
Yeah.
not working, then you have to look at your own boundaries. And that was one thing I was rubbish at. I was
Me too.
rubbish with boundaries,
Oh
my own and
yeah.
everybody else's. But
Yeah.
now I'm much better.
Yeah. It's hard, and um I think there's a perception maybe from those who don't know really what boundaries mean or what they are, or they are in a narcissistic, maybe they're not full narcissists, but they have narcissistic tendencies maybe. It's hard to set boundaries with people who don't acknowledge boundaries or also don't have any, and then boundaries can come across as punishment, especially if you've been punished or you are the punishing type. um, so, setting boundaries with, say, parents who punished you growing up and that was their
Yeah.
way to control you, setting boundaries feels like a punishment to them. Or setting boundaries with, friends, it can feel like a punishment, or like they've done something wrong, like, oh, I'm bad, so they did this thing to me. It's like, no, I'm protecting myself and I'm protecting our relationship by setting this up, because I don't want to allow you to treat me in a way that I don't want to be treated. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you don't want to treat me in a way that I don't want to be treated. So we're going to just set up this boundary. And it's about it's about communicating, I think. And it can be in business, and that's been something I've had to learn as a small business owner, and being the one who has to answer all the questions. And I'm like, oh, I'll send you to my my customer service department. Nope, that's me. Like, I'm all the things.
Yeah, exactly.
But it takes a lot of fortitude to be able to go, oh, I'm gonna stand my ground on this one, or like not undersell yourself, or not back down when you're perceiving something as a complaint, even, because sometimes I'll perceive something as a complaint and then I go back and reread it and I'm like, oh, they're not complaining at all. That was just me
Yeah.
expecting it, right?
No, I
No.
agree with you. I think it's a combination of all things. I
Yeah.
think, you know, if you need therapy, do the therapy, but, you know, eat well, sleep well, live
Hmm.
well, do the therapy,
Yeah.
keep growing, use some creativity. It's
Hmm.
throwing all the things into a pot, isn't it?
Yeah. They call oh, he took a class last summer. They called it the healthy mind platter. And there's
Yeah.
like 8 or 9 different elements. And it's eating well, sleeping well, exercising, um, your relationships with other people, whether it be spouses or friends or siblings or parents. How's the health of those relationships? Are you setting personal time for just yourself to do absolutely nothing? I call it potato time, because I turn into a potato on the sofa. So if you can fill your plate with the rainbow of different things, when you're eating, you want to eat the rainbow, right? Then, a lot of times therapy is one of those things. And I know, especially for us lovely people in the United States who have to pay for our healthcare constantly, because insurance is a racket, a lot of people don't have really good access to mental health care. But I will
Mhm.
say this, because I just learned about this because of my husband. Psychologytoday.com. In the US, you can put in your zip code and you can search for therapists in your area, and you can search by price range. So there are ways to get into it in a less expensive way. So that's my plug for
And
that.
groups as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
and groups
groups.
as well. You know,
Yep.
there are free groups that you can join,
Yep.
where I know it's not the same, but at least it's something.
It's something. Yeah.
It's about, you know, doing something that is better than nothing.
Yeah.
And if you're in a group of people, yes,
Mhm.
you don't get that kind of individual trauma-based therapy, but at least you can hear other people's stories and realize there are other people who are the same as you.
Mhm.
So, or who have had similar experiences, and that can give you hope, and maybe you'll learn something from that. And that might be a free group. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
there are places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do love that, your podcast provides kind of a, again, a global platform where people can hear those stories and can hear from, their favorite makers and go, "Oh, they're in my boat too. Like we're rowing this boat together
Yes.
and I'm not by myself. I'm not the only but person who feels this way." I'm glad you're putting it in a way that allows people to access and maybe get get the push they need or get the validation they need to go, "You know what? Yeah, that did suck and I am going to go seek treatment for that or I am going to talk to this person about this situation." And and then also how crafting can help us work through some of that. It can be the sewing or whatever you're doing can be so meditative, and it allows your brain to get into that state where you can really deeply think about things and give yourself the space to have that time, where otherwise we just fill it with noise and Instagram and
Yes.
YouTube and TV and movies and
Yeah.
you know it's it's
And there
impactful.
are some episodes as well. There are definitely some episodes where, some of the makers, they've not had huge traumas, but they just talk about things that they, come to terms with on a daily basis, or just how creativity inspires them.
Yeah.
Some of the podcasts have been quite deep, and others less so. So it's not it's you don't I do try and mix the episodes up a little bit. It's like creating an album, because I just
Yeah.
think, can we have 3 weeks of serious heavy trauma? So I
Right.
do try and pop in an episode where it's a little bit lighter,
Yeah.
but none of
Sure.
them are really heavy. I mean, it's just more of a fascinating insight. You're not
Mhm.
sort of sitting listening to that someone wailing and crying for 2.5 hours. You
Yeah.
just listen to someone's experience of life.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's I enjoy it. I really enjoy it, and that's what it's about. That's where it came from. That podcast. I just wanted to kind of share
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, I enjoyed being interviewed by you. It felt really natural and it felt really good to talk the way we did because it was it was something that nobody's ever really asked me about in my life, or
Yes.
that I haven't really talked about outside of my home with my husband, who, I'm the stepmother to his children. And yeah, just being able to share that with you was, really interesting, because I'm like, oh, I've never actually talked about this. I've never really said these things out loud necessarily to anybody else besides my husband. And maybe other people are experiencing these similar things as well. And I'll never know until I talk about it, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, all that to say, it's overall positive in my perspective. And who knows, maybe I'll go back and listen and go, wow, I sounded bitchy, but I don't know.
No. No, it was a
Who-
great episode. So,
yeah.
yeah, it was good, and you were very open and very honest and very vulnerable, and that, so you did say some relevant things in there. So, yeah,
Well,
you will
hopefully.
hear it shortly, as will your listeners.
Yeah, right. I know I'm like nervous, but no, it's good. I'm happy if I can share my story and it helps somebody else, then
Then you've
that's what I
done your
want.
job. You've done
Yeah.
your job on planet Earth.
Well, we've covered the gambit of things and
Everything.
everything, all the things, which I love. And so I'm just really grateful that you took the time to sit with me today and have this chat. And I really am truly inspired by your go get 'em attitude of just like, let's just try it. What's the worst that could happen, And I appreciate you. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will put links to all your things in the show notes, and we'll look for your class that you're gonna have in the US and your
Yes.
retreat, I guess,
Yeah.
and people can check Crafty Monkey's website for the upcoming online classes and get signed up. And it's monkeys with an IES at the end, not
Correct.
EYS. So I
Yes.
will spell it correctly in the show notes so people can just click the link. They don't have to spell it themselves. But anyway, thanks again,
Yeah,
Rachel, and we'll obviously stay in touch, and otherwise look for my episode on your show soon. And
absolutely.
this
Yeah.
yours will come out before mine, so this is good. It's good.
Yeah.
Free
Yeah, but
advertising.
thank you so much for having me as well. It's been it's been a joy, and it's just great to meet you. And as you said, as we've said off camera, we should try and support each other as well. And we will
Yeah.
do something else. There will
Yeah.
be further discussions and things.
Yeah.
It is just about supporting people in our lives, and
Yeah.
that's one thing we all need to do. Keep stepping forward and keep helping people, because it all
Yep.
goes around. What goes around comes around. If you just help people, then you'll get
Absolutely.
things back, and it's a ever lasting lovely circle to be a part of. So
Yeah.
yeah, so thank you for having me here. It's been good to talk.
Well, we'll talk again soon.
We will.